The courtroom was already tense, but when the woman in the navy blazer leaned into the microphone and whispered just 5 words, Echo Whiskey. 7-2, Alpha. The room stopped breathing. Chairs creaked as uniformed officers sat upright. A judge froze, gavel, mid-air. Even the court reporter hesitated, unsure if what she heard was real. For years, they thought she was dead buried, alongside a failed operation the military had quietly erased. But now, here she was, alive, calm, and ready to speak the truth. No one wanted to hear. Her name was Laura Bennett. On the surface, she was just another civilian intelligence contractor. No rank, no ribbons, nothing to mark her as anything special until now. She hadn't been called to testify in the trial of Major Eric Dalton, a decorated officer accused of mishandling Operation Cold Ridge, a mission that left 5 American agents dead in enemy territory. Instead, she had stood quietly in the back of the courtroom, unnoticed, until she asked to speak. Her voice was so soft to the judge, Sunwam. Colonel Miriam Blake grew frustrated. Please, Miss Bennett, speak up for the record, she said sternly. But when Laura finally did, when she uttered that classified call sign, everything changed. The courtroom, moments ago, steeped in procedure and routine, became a stage for revelation. I was the field specialist for Operation Cold Ridge, she said, and the only survivor of Echo Whiskey, a black ops mission buried 3 years ago. The name sent shockwaves through the room. Echo Whiskey had been a ghost story in military circles, a rumor of a team lost in foreign terrain, officially marked KIA killed in action with no bodies ever recovered. But Laura's presence and her whispered code shattered that narrative. And then she opened a battered, blood-stained tactical notebook, the real mission orders, the evidence no one was supposed to see. Her words didn't just shift the trial, they unraveled a cover-up reaching the highest levels of command. Major Dalton, the man being prosecuted, hadn't failed. He'd followed direct orders from command orders based on doctored intel. The real failure, it wasn't his. It belonged to those who manipulated him and left good people to die in silence. And now, their silence had ended. No one in the courtroom expected Laura Bennett to say much, if anything at all. To most people in the room, she was just another low-level analyst, civilian contractor, no uniform. No visible scars. Just a quiet woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and a voice too soft for court recorders to capture clearly. But then she leaned forward and said the phrase that hadn't been spoken aloud in 3 years. Echo Whiskey, 72, Alpha. The moment she said it, the room shifted. The judge dropped her gavel. The defense team froze. A retired colonel in the gallery gripped the bench in front of him like he'd seen a ghost. For years, everyone believed that Mission Echo Whiskey was a failure that ended with the team declared dead. Laura had been listed among them, but she hadn't died. She'd been left behind. Laura opened a weather-worn tactical notebook, the same one she'd carried through enemy territory and across borders under assumed names. Inside were pages of field notes, coordinates, encryption codes, and signatures, real ones, evidence that proved not only that her team had uncovered a black market weapons pipeline, but also that they were deliberately abandoned by command after reporting it. Major Eric Dalton, the man on trial, had aborted an extraction mission under orders he believed were valid. But Laura now revealed those orders were forged signed under Colonel Miriam Blake's name, without her knowledge. A forged signature that condemned 5 operatives to die in silence. I heard your voice that day, Laura told Major Dalton quietly. You hesitated. You questioned the order 3 times. You were following protocol, but the protocol had been twisted. Dalton's face paled. He hadn't recognized the woman at first, but now it was all rushing back, her voice on the other end of the comm. Pus faint. Bloody but pleading for a second chance, and his own response, forced and hollow. Abort confirmed. This wasn't just a courtroom drama. This was the beginning of a reckoning. Laura didn't return from the dead for revenge. She returned for the truth. To clear the names of her team. To expose the rot inside the system. To make sure no soldier was ever again abandoned under the guise of national security. And now that truth had a voice. I never authorized that order, Colonel Miriam Blake whispered, her voice trembling as she stared down at the document in her hands. The signature at the bottom, her own, was a forgery. Across the courtroom, Laura Bennett stood firm, the weight of 3 years in hiding evident in her steady gaze. Her words had already sent shockwaves through the room, but this was the moment everything changed. See, from the beginning, Laura hadn't come to accuse, she came to reveal. And now, With 2 sheets of paper, she was cracking open the truth. The extraction order that led to the death of her team wasn't a military mistake. It was sabotage, cloaked under a falsified directive bearing Colonel Blake's name. As the retired colonel gripped the bench before him, visibly shaken, Laura laid out more detailed logs of radio communications, maps marked with real-time coordinates, and personal accounts from those few in intelligence who had dared to help her from the shadows. One document showed that Major Eric Dalton had, in fact, asked for confirmation of the abort command 3 times. Each time, he was threatened with court-martial if he disobeyed. "You weren't negligent," she told him. "You were manipulated." The silence that followed was deafening. These weren't just clerical errors or lapses in protocol. They were deliberate acts of betrayal. Men and women had died not because of the fog of war, but because they uncovered a weapons smuggling operation tied to top-level military officials. And Laura had survived it all. She held up her notebook again, revealing page after page of notes taken while bleeding in a ravine, while hiding in a shepherd's hut overseas, while piecing together what really happened. Colonel Blake, once believed to be responsible for condemning the team, now realized she too had been a pawn. Her public mask of control crumbled as the weight of guilt unearned, yet heavy lifted slightly, sobbed, "Laura." 3 years, she said softly, tears rising in her eyes. "Oi, I've lived with the belief that I gave an order that killed good people." Laura closed the distance between them, not with anger, but with truth. "You didn't," she said. "And now, the world will finally know it." The courtroom had seen its share of testimony, but never anything like this. Laura Bennett leaned forward toward the microphone, her voice still barely above a whisper. "Phantom Sierra, 7-2 Alpha," she said. The effect was instantaneous. Colonel Miriam Blake's gavel slipped from her fingers and hit the desk with a loud clatter. Officers throughout the courtroom stiffened like they'd just heard a long-buried command code. One silver-haired veteran slowly stood, his face pale with recognition. The weight of that call sign hit them all like a punch to the chest. Because that wasn't just a phrase, it was a ghost resurfacing. A classified operation that never made it into the history books. A mission declared lost, its team presumed dead Laura among them. And yet here she was. As murmurs swirled through the courtroom, Laura reached into her worn messenger bag and pulled out a weathered, blood-stained notebook. Her fingers were steady as she held it up. "This is the real mission log from Operation Stormfall," she said. "The version no one was supposed to see." She turned page after page coordinates, tactical notes, satellite overlays, and decrypted comm logs. But it was what she said next that silenced the room once more. Major Dalton didn't abandon the team because of poor judgment. He followed a direct order, an order forged under Colonel Blake's name. The colonel's face turned to stone. Laura continued. "The team was left behind not because of an error, but because they uncovered something they weren't supposed to see: unauthorized weapons sales. Tied to someone higher up the chain, they were silenced. And I was supposed to die with them." Her gaze shifted to Major Dalton. "But I didn't." He stared back, speechless. The courtroom was no longer a stage for defense and prosecution. It had become a battleground for truth. For the first time in 3 years, the silence surrounding Operation Stormfall was broken not by a shout, but by a whisper with the weight of justice behind it. And the world would never see Laura Bennett the same way again. Laura Bennett stood alone as the courtroom emptied, the fading sunlight casting long shadows across the polished floor. The shock of her testimony still lingered in the air like the aftershock of a distant explosion. Families of the fallen operatives remained seated, too stunned to move. Some had come believing the trial was a procedural hearing. None had expected it to turn into the unraveling of a cover-up that spanned years. From her canvas bag, Laura carefully removed a sealed, waterproof case. Inside were the artifacts of truth. Dog tags, encrypted transmission logs, field reports, hand-scribbled mission notes, and a microfilm canister containing records no one had seen since the day her team vanished in a blast zone overseas. She opened the case slowly, laying each item on the table before her. "I documented everything," she said softly, her voice no longer hidden. "When I realized we were being cut off abandoned, I knew I had to leave a trail someone could follow. If not for me, then for them." A mother stepped forward. Tears brimming in her eyes, she clutched the worn compass Laura handed her. This was my son's, wasn't it?" Yes," Laura answered gently. "He carried it every day, said it reminded him where home was." Others followed. A father received his daughter's service pin. A young man accepted his brother's last letter. In their hands, these mementos carried more than memory. They carried truth. And the promise that their loved ones would no longer be remembered as casualties of negligence, but as heroes who uncovered corruption at the highest levels. Colonel Miriam Blake, once stern and composed, approached slowly, We're reopening the case. Yo, she said, her voice thick. Their records will be amended. Their names will be cleared. Laura nodded. That's all I ever wanted. Not revenge. Just truth. As night descended and the courthouse lights flickered on, Laura remained with the families. In that moment, she wasn't a ghost or a rogue operator. She was a soldier who had kept a promise, not just to her team, but to the nation they served. Colonel Miriam Blake stood at the front of the courtroom, her voice steady but laden with emotion. We're reopening the investigation. These operatives did not die because of poor judgment or bad intel. They were betrayed. For years, she had carried the unbearable weight of believing she had signed the order that condemned Laura Bennett's team. But now, the truth lay bare before her, in documents with forged signatures, in logs that had been scrubbed from the official record. She had never given the abort order, and yet she had lived with the guilt of it. Colonel Isaac Vega, who had trained Laura's team, stepped forward, his voice rough with decades of service and sorrow. I thought I failed them, he confessed, but it was never about our training. It was about someone choosing to sacrifice them. Laura placed a hand on his shoulder. You trained us to fight for the truth. Sir, that's what I've done. Nearby, Major David Kasner. The officer who had called off the extraction stood speechless. I followed orders, he whispered. They told me the team was already gone. I didn't know. You weren't to blame, Laura replied gently. You asked for confirmation 3 times. I heard you. You hesitated. That hesitation saved my life. Brigadier General Marcus Foster addressed the room next. We've already secured a warrant for General Hadley's detainment. His connections won't shield him now. Thanks to the evidence Commander Bennett has provided, we're taking this to the top. As sunlight dimmed beyond the courthouse windows, something deeper settled over the room. Relief, vindication, but also grief. Grief for the lost time, the lies, and the heroes left behind. This was never about vengeance, Laura said, turning to face the families once more. This was about restoring honor and exposing those who twisted duty into profit. As the courtroom began to empty, she stayed behind a moment longer, just long enough to see the names of her fallen teammates cleared. And for the first time in 3 years, she allowed herself to hope that justice, however delayed, was still possible. The courtroom was nearly empty as Laura Bennett reached into her worn military satchel and gently laid out the final pieces of evidence: dog tags, encrypted field logs, a compass smeared with dried mud, and a folded photo of a smiling team. All now ghosts of a mission no one was supposed to remember. Across from her sat the family's fathers, sisters, sons who had shown up that morning expecting nothing more than a routine military hearing. Now, they knew the truth. Their loved ones hadn't died because of negligence. They had died protecting the truth. Laura turned to an elderly man wearing a lapel pin etched with his daughter's initials. Lieutenant Karen Frost was our medic, she said softly. Her last act was saving my life with a tourniquet after the blast. The man swallowed hard, blinking back tears. They told me it was quick. She made sure it was meaningful, Laura replied. As sunset cast long golden beams through the courthouse windows, Colonel Miriam Blake re-entered the room with documents in hand. The Department of Defense has agreed to reopen the official record. Their status will be amended. They'll be remembered for their courage, not as casualties of a cover-up. Colonel Vega stood beside her, eyes clouded with emotion. For 3 years, I blamed myself. He said, but you carried their memory. Laura, you carried the truth. Laura offered a quiet nod. I made a promise. If I survived, I'd tell their story. Major Kasner stepped forward, his voice shaky. I need to say it, I'm sorry. I believed the lie. I didn't know they were still alive. You weren't the one who abandoned us, she replied. Her voice resolute. You were manipulated, like the rest of us. As the military police secured the evidence and prepared Laura for secure transport, the families crowded around her. One mother clutched her son's compass and whispered, he always knew the way home. Laura smiled gently. And now, through all of this, he's finally found it. As the courtroom emptied, Laura Bennett remained behind with the families. Colonel Vega, Major Kasner, and Colonel Blake. The tension had lifted, but the weight of what had been revealed still lingered like a storm cloud refusing to pass. Laura reached into her military-issued duffel, pulling out a waterproof case. She laid it on the table and opened it with reverence. Inside were handwritten mission logs, encrypted comms records, and a flash drive containing intercepted transmissions, all painstakingly preserved. I kept everything, she said. The day I realized our extraction was canceled, I started documenting every detail I could. I had to ensure the truth would survive. Even if I didn't, a young man stepped forward, his face nearly identical to the fallen soldier in one of Laura's photos. How did you survive the blast? Laura looked at him, her voice even. I was in the comms room with Staff Sergeant Eric Reeves when the building was hit. The explosion threw me out a side window. I came to, bleeding, alone. I tried to reach my team, but insurgents had already surrounded the area. She paused. I heard Major Kastner's voice over the radio. He was calling off the extraction. I remember how broken he sounded. Major Kastner looked down, guilt etched into every line on his face. I was told, you were all gone. That proceeding would be suicide. Laura met his eyes. I know. That's why I came back, not for revenge, but to clear your name. And theirs. Colonel Blake stepped forward with the manila folder. We're reopening the case files, she said. Their deaths will be recorded as honorable. Six. Not forgotten, not erased. Colonel Vega, who had trained the Phantom Sierra team, finally found his voice. I thought I failed them. You didn't, Laura said. You gave us the skills to fight, to endure, and to tell the truth, no matter the cost. Outside, the setting sun bathed the courthouse steps in amber light. As Laura handed the dog tags and personal items to each grieving family member, she whispered the same words to each. They never uppspandin stantur, gaver. Neither did I. And in that moment, the truth finally found its way home. As Laura Bennett descended the courthouse steps, the shadows of the past 3 years finally began to lift. No longer hidden behind civilian clothes or silence, she walked not just as a survivor, but as a truth bearer. Her quiet footsteps echoed louder than any speech could, because she had done the impossible, brought light to what powerful forces tried to bury. Behind her, justice stirred. The courtroom where her voice had once been dismissed now stood in stunned reverence. Families who had buried their sons and daughters with questions in their hearts now clutched evidence in their hands. Proof that their loved ones had died with honor, not from negligence. Colonel Blake, stripped of her black robes, stood silently at the top of the courthouse steps, watching the woman she once nearly silenced. Her face bore the lines of leadership, the pain of guilt wrongly carried, and the weight of truth newly discovered. Beside her stood Colonel Vega, a soldier forged in decades of war, who had trained the very team lost to betrayal. His eyes, once filled with regret, now reflected pride. You didn't just do your duty, Vega said softly as Laura passed. You did something more. I only followed what you taught us. Laura replied, not stopping. You trained us to protect what's right, not just follow orders. Along the walkway, military personnel, some once skeptical, stood at attention. They weren't saluting a uniform. They were honoring the truth, and the woman brave enough to speak it. A gray-haired veteran stepped beside her. Some heroes never wear medals, he said. Voice low, they just carry the weight of them. Laura offered him a small, knowing smile. And some truths, she said. Whisper louder than any shout. As she stepped into the waiting vehicle. Her journey wasn't over. Justice still had miles to go. Investigations would follow. Questions would multiply. But something irreversible had happened in that courtroom. The silence was broken. The fallen were remembered. And a single quiet voice had turned the course of history.